You heard of the Doge dividend. Well, how about a tariff tip? President Trump says America's tariff revenue windfall could show up directly in Americans' bank accounts. He is leaving the door open for rebate checks after customs revenue hit record highs in June. I think we've pulled in $100 billion so far this year.
That's right.
300 is projected by the end of the year. But critics say America needs to put all this money towards its massive debt pile, still sitting around $36 trillion. And for me, I'm a little bit mixed on this one.
Amid a national debt soaring past 36 trillion United States dollars, a bold idea has ignited fierce debate across political and economic circles in America, issuing direct rebate checks to citizens using the massive revenue collected from import tariffs, often dubbed a national dividend. The proposal has sparked conversations not only about fiscal responsibility, but also about political tactics and how governments should communicate economic benefits to their people. In the first half of the year, the United States federal government collected more than 100 billion United States dollars from customs duties, a figure expected to hit 300 billion by year-end. This surge, largely driven by protectionist trade policies from the previous administration, has prompted discussions about whether part of this revenue should be returned to citizens through direct payments proposed at approximately 1,200 United States dollars per eligible person. Supporters say the idea allows Americans to tangibly benefit from trade policies. Critics, however, argue it could mirror past stimulus packages that worsened inflation and suggest the money should instead be used to reduce the ballooning national debt. "We don't have a surplus," warned one fiscal analyst. "We're projecting benefits from a temporary influx without addressing the structural deficit. Giving out checks in this context is a dangerous precedent." And yet, proponents maintain that visible, direct benefits help build trust and show the public that government action matters. "If voters can't feel it, they won't believe in it," said one strategist. "A speech won't do it. A check will." As debates mount on cable news, financial columns, and political podcasts, the real question isn't whether the proposal is generous, but whether it reflects a clear economic vision or just clever campaign machinery. The line between economic stimulus and political incentive has never been thinner. Give cash to keep the people, or hold on to it to secure the nation? The debate has begun, and behind the numbers lies a far more complicated equation. The so-called Doge Dividend didn't appear out of thin air. It stems from aggressive trade strategies implemented under former President Donald Trump, particularly targeting China. These policies introduced steep tariffs on imported goods, boosting federal revenue from customs duties to historic levels. According to the United States Customs and Border Protection, more than 100 billion United States dollars were collected in import tariffs in the first 6 months of this year. If the trend continues, the total could reach 300 billion by year-end, a post-World War II record. This unexpected windfall raised a crucial question: what should be done with this money? On a televised debate, one commentator remarked, "We're thinking about a small rebate, but the big goal is debt reduction." Yet moments later, the same speaker left the door open to issuing rebate checks, highlighting a central tension between long-term fiscal repair and short-term political opportunity. The proposed $1,200 per person dividend isn't just an economic policy. It's also a calculated political signal, a way of reinforcing that current trade policies are benefiting everyday Americans. "People need to see and feel that they're gaining from policy choices," said a political advisor. "A direct check accomplishes that better than a quarterly report ever could." The proposal is also being paired with related social initiatives, such as baby savings accounts, aimed at reversing declining birth rates. In this way, the dividend is framed not as a handout, but as an investment in future generations. However, opponents were quick to push back. "This isn't the time for giveaways." One analyst countered, "The pandemic justified emergency payments, but this is not a crisis moment. We should be paying down debt, not handing out more checks." Critics also question whether tariff revenue constitutes a true surplus. "I support tax cuts when we have a surplus," said one finance expert, "but we don't have one. This revenue doesn't come close to offsetting our deficits." The contradiction is clear. While the government boasts record revenue from tariffs, it's still running an overall budget shortfall. One commentator summarized it succinctly: "We're pretending we have a surplus, just so we can justify a new handout." Empron. Regardless of the economic logic, the proposal has already become a political tool. The question may no longer be, is it sound policy, but rather, who would dare oppose this before an election? In a political climate increasingly driven by perception, a check can be more persuasive than any economic chart. If the Doge dividend represents tactical generosity, its opponents argue that it exemplifies poor fiscal discipline. While some welcome the idea of receiving $1,200 as a share of tariff revenue, others see it as a dangerous distraction from the real issue: a national debt topping 36 trillion United States dollars. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the U.S. debt now stands at nearly 130% of the country's gross domestic product. Every minute, the debt rises by millions of dollars. Against this backdrop, even a modest new spending measure is viewed with skepticism. "This check won't change anyone's life," said a New York-based analyst, "but it will deepen our already unsustainable trajectory." Some fiscal hawks argue that issuing rebates sends the wrong message that America can simply spend its way into popularity. "We're setting a precedent that undermines long-term discipline," said a former Treasury advisor. "We're not rewarding growth, we're just buying time." Oh, 3. There's also a deeper truth. Tariff revenue may not be as external as it seems. While it's politically framed as money taken from foreign entities, economists point out that tariffs typically raise prices for American consumers. "You think the money came from China?" "No," said one Princeton economist. "Most of it came from Americans paying higher prices for imported goods." That reframes the dividend as something closer to a partial refund of an invisible tax. Others go further, arguing that this moment could be used to reinforce national values around savings and sacrifice. "We used to teach our kids about patience and long-term goals," said a White House economic advisor. "But if we keep issuing checks every time revenue spikes, what values are we instilling?" Yet political reality paints a different picture. In an economy where housing, food, and healthcare costs continue to climb, even a modest check has significant emotional value. $1,200 might not solve structural issues, said a sociologist. But for many Americans, it says, "You have not been forgotten." End of trade. Ultimately, this debate reflects a clash between two fiscal ideologies: save for the future versus spend to stay relevant. And in a media-driven age, sometimes a single check has more power than 1,000 policy briefings. For many, the Doge dividend is less about economics and more about electoral strategy. Behind the push for direct payments is a calculated attempt to create an emotional connection with voters, especially ahead of the presidential campaign cycle. Political media experts agree. Handing people money is one of the most tangible ways to communicate government efficacy. "It's about perception," said one strategist. "If you want voters to support your trade policy, put money in their account and let them feel it." This approach dovetails with other post-pandemic welfare expansions: free rent, transit subsidies, and food assistance, which have reshaped public expectations. In this environment, a direct rebate seems less like an anomaly and more like a continuation of a broader shift in governance. Still, economists warn that such tactics blur the line between responsible budgeting and political marketing. We're in danger of thinking that checks equal good governance. One researcher at the Institute for Public Policy stated, "Others are more blunt. This is not policy, it's performance," said a former member of the National Economic Council. "You create a feel-good moment, but you're not solving the real problems." Supporters, however, argue that policy must be felt to be believed. With trust in government institutions at historic lows, they say direct benefits are necessary. "A check builds trust. A speech doesn't," one campaign advisor noted. Another argument: "We can grow our way out of debt." That is, increased consumer spending from rebates will stimulate the economy, create jobs, and ultimately raise tax revenues. But this model is fraught with risk, especially in a high interest rate environment where inflation remains persistent. Some critics ask, if stimulus is the goal, why not invest in infrastructure, education, or technology, a check lasts a week, said one congressperson. A bridge or a power station lasts a generation? It drew. In the end, the debate is not only about where the money goes, it's about what message it sends. Is it a sign of compassion or an act of political calculation? A moment of generosity or a substitute for real reform? As Americans await word on whether they'll receive another round of checks, economists are asking a different question. What happened to delayed gratification? In a culture increasingly conditioned to expect immediate benefits, the proposal to distribute cash, however symbolic, raises concern that the U.S. is trading away its long-standing fiscal values for short-term applause. We're losing the chance to teach the next generation about discipline, said one analyst. Instead of saving or paying off debt, we're offering instant rewards. And the real cost may not be the money itself, but the mentality it creates. We're normalizing the idea that good policy always comes with a prize, noted a former White House advisor. That's a dangerous game. It's also inflationary. Any injection of cash into the economy, whether labeled a stimulus, a rebate, or a dividend, can drive up prices if not matched by real productivity. Call it what you want, said a financial journalist. But this is government spending? Plain and simple. Critics also raise fairness issues. Why should billionaires and low-income families receive the same amount? This is faux equality, argued a sociologist. It treats everyone the same, but benefits them unequally. Instead of blanket checks, some propose long-term investments in public goods, schools, roads, renewable energy that create lasting value. A check disappears. A public library doesn't, said a member of Congress. Still, in an age of rapid media cycles and economic anxiety, the emotional power of a direct transfer cannot be ignored. You can talk theory all day, said a media strategist, but $1,200 in your account is proof you matter? This raises a fundamental question. Is America building a future based on responsibility or managing the present with emotional incentives? The growing gap between optics and substance, between investment and consumption, speaks volumes. And in that gap lies a national choice, not just about how we spend money, but about the kind of people we want to be. As the debate around the Doge dividend rages on, one thing is clear. The United States is at a crossroads where economic policy has become inseparable from political identity. The government may have collected $300 billion in tariffs, but it also holds more than $36 trillion in debt. A one-time rebate of $1,200 per person may feel like generosity, but without a plan, it risks becoming an empty gesture. Supporters argue that people need help. They're not thinking about the federal budget, they're thinking about rent, medical bills, and school supplies. From that perspective, a check matters. But for policymakers, this is the moment to redefine post-pandemic fiscal values. After years of stimulus and monetary expansion, perhaps it's time to return to the principle, don't spend what you don't produce. Some say this is compassionate governance. Others call it strategic pandering. The bigger concern, will this become a precedent? If every revenue bump results in a payout, what happens to the ethic of national savings? And, more urgently, can short-term checks solve long-term challenges? Inflation doesn't disappear with more cash. Debt doesn't shrink through delay. Trust in government cannot be bought with one-time transfers. Citizens may celebrate a direct deposit, but the next generation may pay for it with higher debt, reduced services, and diminished expectations. So in the end, the question isn't just economic, it's moral. Will America chart a path guided by discipline or by indulgence? Because sometimes, the most courageous act in governance is not giving more but choosing when to say no. For in some moments, keeping the money may protect something far more valuable, our national integrity.